All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we are talking about the decline of the church, the Christian church in the U.S. and in the West. What's going on? How does the church itself, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, fit into all of this? And do we go along with the same trends? This episode is brought to you by Go and Do Travel and Gospel on the Nile. This is a great trip. It's a bucket list trip for those of you who have not been to Egypt or have. You get the opportunity to see these incredible ruins and to learn about our own temple. I believe you will learn more about the temple at Egypt than you will in any other place except for the temple itself. You can find out more by going to CwicMedia.com, go up to the top, hit trips and events, and scroll down to Gospel on the Nile. All right, so several things to talk about here on this episode that I think are very vital, very pertinent to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. First of all, what I want to talk about is Christianity as a whole and what's happening in the dechurching, so to speak, of Christianity in the United States. There is a political scientist who is a researcher and pastor himself. He is also a professor and political scientist. His name is Ryan Burge. I've been following him for quite some time. But he puts out some amazing data on Christianity especially. And his research on the declining levels of religious participation provides the basis, for example, for the book The Great Dechurching by Jim Davis and Michael Graham. Now, they say that what we're seeing right now in the United States is the largest and fastest religious shift in U.S. history. That's either way. You go back and you talk about the Great Awakening, right? Or the Second Great Awakening. Even the changes to the positive for religion do not match anywhere close to what we are seeing, anywhere close to what we're seeing in the dechurching of America today. This shift shows that 1 in 6 Americans have stopped going to church in the past 30 years. So not counting those that already were not going to church at all, but adding now the last 30 years, 1 in 6 Americans, that's 40 million people, have stopped going to church in the last 30 years. That's the net number. In 2019, the last time we had the data on this information, with the Protestants, they had 3,000 new Protestant churches open and 4,500 closed. That's in 1 year. The United States has dropped recently down to the 61st most religious country in the world, still ahead of the European countries. And you think about what that means, it's, religion is what you were tied closest to. And if you have these other, especially in the Middle East, right, where you've got other countries, their focus is their religion. That is their culture. That is what drives them. That is their political positioning. That used to be more the case with the United States. Even though we're looking for pluralism here, you had a very Christian nation, still Christian. I think 70% at least identify still as Christian, but that number continues to drop. But not very active anymore compared to where we were 30 years ago. Here's some other interesting information. There is what we call the God gap, which is the concept that Democrats, right, members of the Democratic Party, have left religion more quickly than those of the Republicans. Well, this is without question. Here's some numbers on this. And this isn't even meant to be political. It's just we want to look at what is happening right now in the United States. For an atheistic or agnostic belief, right, from 1982 to 2022, that's a 34-year period. Back in 1988, 5% of members of the Democratic Party identified as atheist or agnostic. 5%, right? The Republicans in 1988, 4%. So it was very, very close. Now let's see what has happened here in the last 34 years. The Dems have gone to 20% of the Democrat Party have now become atheist or agnostic. Okay, that's in the Democrat Party. In the Republican Party, it's moved up from 4 to 6%. So we see that God gap really expanding very strongly. Here's another one. In 1972 to 2022, so the last 50 years, the members of the Democrat Party were 9% of those that never attended church. That has now gone to 37%. Now, this one's a little bit closer, not quite the same gap. But in 1972, for Republicans, 8% never attended. So still, again, very close to where the Democrat Party was, right? They have gone up to 23%. So 37% for the Dems, 23% for the Republicans here now since 2022. Here's another one. The nuns, right? Those that no longer belong to any Christian denomination. They go to a non-denominational or affiliate with non-denominational churches. Back in 1972, 50 years ago plus, the Dems were at 4%, the Republicans at 3%. Again, very close. You now have the Dems who are now at 33%. 33%. And for the Republicans, 14%. So you see this moving out and away from a specific theology, a specific, perhaps even view of a worldview, right? That goes much further out here with the Democrats than it does with the Republicans. We can see here on this graph, if you're on video, you can see where, and this is from Ryan Burge. I think the data from this is coming from the General Social Survey. Yep, 1972 to 2022. You can see the differences here and the disparity and the gaps that are happening. It's very interesting. You are getting a party that is less affiliated with God than it was, 30 to 50 years ago, which is the Republicans, right? That is diminishing. But you are getting a very much a political party where now 20% of the party with the Democrats are atheist or agnostic, and 37% never attend church. Okay, so more than 1 in 3 never attend church with the Democrat Party. So what happens with this? Well, what you're going to get then is the different parties that are playing more to their base, and the Dems are going to play more and more to a base that is less religious. That is how it's going to work. Here's another one that is really interesting, and I'm not going to bring this one up, but this is from Pew, and they talk about the differences between Democrats and Republicans on a couple of different questions that are more about focused on values and cultural issues between those that are voting for Harris and those that are voting for Trump. And I want to focus on 2 questions here that came up that I thought were really fascinating here. Here's one. This is a statement that was put out. Someone can be a man or a woman even if that is different from the sex they were assigned at birth. 7% of Republicans agreed with this. 60% of Democrats believe this. Okay? Again, that someone can be a man or a woman, not even feel like one. Someone can be a man or a woman even if that is different from the sex they were assigned at birth. And they're not assigned a sex, right? 1/3, 34%, 1/3 of all voters believe that this is true. That's where we are in the U.S. on gender and identity. Now, I want to go down to another one. Society is better off, in this statement, society is better off if people make marriage and having children a priority. 60% of Republicans say this. I'm surprised it's that low. 60% of Americans say this. 17% of Democrats agree with this statement, that society is better off if people make marriage and having children a priority. 39%, right, almost 40% of all Americans believe that this is true. So less than half believe that we should be making marriage and children a priority. So as the sun is setting on the day of the Gentiles here in the United States and in Europe, what is happening? What is going on? I think there's a few things we need to look at. Number one, yes, there is a greater level of secularism happening in the United States and in the West. And we are rooting out, I believe, systematically, the belief in God and in organized religion. It is a natural tendency to move these things out of the way. Secondly, with family and identity, we are systematically, and this is where the real force is, moving from an identity of man and woman, something that is crucial to the idea of marriage and family, right? We are pushing this further and further to a position where these things don't matter, where we don't care about gender, we don't care about a man and a woman and the ability for them to have a family. This is not just a secular push, although in the end it is a corruption of where we currently are at. And what you see in the churches today is not a matter of just focusing on secularism, right? It's not korahor, it's nihor. While several individuals end up in a position of secularism and agnostic and becoming agnostics and becoming atheists, the hook, the carrot for these individuals, especially in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as I see it, has much more to do with a corruption of the church hierarchical structure with the 15, right? The brethren. It has a corrupt, not them, but who corrupt them and view them as an old white patriarchy, right? And then a corruption of identity, which is happening very quickly. And you see the recent policy changes that have had to be put in place from Salt Lake on transgenderism, right? These are things that we're just scratching the surface on these things. And then ultimately on family. And I, how many converts have you talked to that from 10 years or beyond, one of the major things that they loved about the church was the focus on family? And how much do we talk about that anymore? How many people contact me saying, my bishop told me that in my talk on family, I maybe shouldn't bring up the family proclamation, or in my Relief Society lesson, or I raised my hand and talked about the family proclamation, and someone said I was using that as a bully club. So when we bring up these issues, the question I have, as this shift in culture continues to move and bring us into a, where I believe is a fulfillment of the Hegelian dialectic, a certain utopia that certain people search for, which is a corruption of Zion. As the culture moves further and further into the core and the heart of Babylon, and the valley of death, I believe, don't we need to separate ourselves more and more and become more that shining city on a hill? Or are we trying to keep a foot in Babylon, right? Keep a cottage house, a vacation home, as has been stated before, in Babylon. And wouldn't it matter for us as far as growth of the church, where we are now still one of the better growth churches in Christianity in the United States? I think we're just, overall globally, we're just over 1%, I believe. We used to be, when we were really focused on certain things, especially the family, we used to be at a growth rate of over 4%. That was the heyday, right, of the late 20th century. And it's like, why aren't we focusing on these things still? And I'm not just talking about Salt Lake. I'm talking about you and me. I'm talking about what we speak about. I'm talking about what we believe in. I'm talking about how do you share the gospel and your example of your life with those around you. And if we were to make that disparity much larger, I think we would have so many more people looking to the church as a solution and an alternative to where the culture is going. If we continue to try and follow the culture, then I think we lose a number of those people, as they say, well, wait a minute, your policies, your beliefs, your attitudes are just like everybody else. And yet you have that contingent of membership, I think, that are wanting so desperately to be accepted by the world, especially by Christianity as a whole, by following what Babylon is teaching, by following what the culture is becoming when it comes to these progressive issues that are taking such a strong hold on our culture today. And yet, look at the churches that are growing. We're still hanging in there. Some of the strongest churches that continue to grow are the ones that are the most conservative, right? Like the Assemblies of God, and those that are the Pentecostals, the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? These are the churches that are growing at their best, because those that continue to slide toward a progressive approach to identity and family and beyond are falling apart. They're not only losing membership, they are splitting over and over again. The Methodists and you're having problems with the Anglican traditions with the Church of England and the Episcopalians, right? These are issues with the Southern Baptist Convention that there's the writings on the wall there with those that have leadership and that continue to try and make changes with what was still is by membership the most conservative denomination probably of all the Protestants. But those that have control and have the largest voices are not in that vein. Those are changing quite a bit. So where do we go? Do you try and appease those that are around us, or do we distinguish ourselves more and show people the alternative? You don't have to be weird. You can be peculiar, but you don't have to be weird. You can be in the world, but not of the world. You can understand and be aware of the philosophies of men in the world without being of the philosophies of men that are in the world. And look at ourselves globally. Here's where the issue comes. You'll oftentimes hear the statement that I get oftentimes by, say, for example, progressive members of the church or individuals that are talking about their children that identify as a different, non-binary or as a different gender. You'll oftentimes hear from them, well, if we don't change as a church, in other words, go along with Babylon, if we don't go along with the culture, then you're going to lose people like me and my kids and others from the church. So you better change, right? You better have women in the priesthood, or you're going to lose members of the church. Look, that might be true. But there's two things. One's practical and one's just truth. Do we follow the world, or do we follow the scriptures and the Lord? That, regardless of the consequences, that's number one. The practical point is, do you know how many people we would lose in the church if women were given the priesthood and if we gave up on family, on the traditional family? Then who are we? The number of people that would unfortunately leave the church because of that, as compared to those that would leave because we're not bringing those things into the church, because we don't have gay marriage in the temple. It is not even close. It's a horrible argument made by those that are trying to make change within the church. We continue to de-church throughout America, with Christianity and throughout the West. Why? Yes, it's a matter of a broader secularization and a broader lack of religiosity. I would say a lack of the doctrine of Christ in people's lives in the West overall. But secondarily, it's because of the policies of going along with the rest of the world instead of sticking to true Christian values that have always been there and have always existed. And I hope that as a church, as members of the church, we can see this and we keep that separation in place and we stick to our values and we give people an opportunity to see the difference that are not members of the church, stand for what we believe in, message for what we believe in, and give people a choice between the valley of Babylon and the bright city up on a hill. Thanks for listening.